Today is October the 1st, 1989. I haven't dictated on the tapes in about a year, and I decided that perhaps I better start doing it again. I just thought of something while speaking with Lee on the phone a few days ago when I called her to tell her about a letter which her father had written to me in 1928 while I was in college. She had never known her dad because he died before she was born, and I thought she'd like to hear what her dad had to say to me and perhaps even have it. It sort of would link her many years later with the father whom she had never known. My brother. We spoke of the past years of the Fisher Penar family and their doings. In a somewhat frivolous conversation, I mentioned that my dad was most likely not the only suitor my mother had, and also most likely many admirers. We all in our youth had some of those same experiences, I'm sure. I mentioned to Lee my father's jaunts and his desertion from the army and all that, if we may call it that. And I don't like to call it desertion. I'd rather say that he had to flee to save his life, and I'm glad he did. Well, anyway, as we all, as wives, sometimes say to ourselves, maybe not aloud, I wonder what it would have been like if I had married someone else. Right? Right. I recall my mother telling me stories of her childhood, her later years as a teenager, and then her experiences with beaux, her boyfriends. In America, she had had a suitor other than my father, maybe more than one. This young man wanted to marry her desperately and must have hounded her to the point that she couldn't stand him any longer. So, she devised a way to discourage him for good. And what could be better than to insult him so badly that out of pure humiliation he would leave her alone? Lee and I laughed over my mother's final decision, a cute Polish expression, or saying, as it were. I will express it in Polish, then translate it into English, so that you can judge for yourselves how final it can be to a suitor. Here goes. Za wysokie progi na twoje nogi. Translation. The doorsteps or thresholds to my house are far too high for your feet to step over. Can you see the meaning to it? Could anyone return after such an axiom? You know the rest, the real meaning, of course, was that he was too inferior to her, or to say it another way, she was superior to him. My mom used to laugh over it when she mentioned that to me. It used to make me wonder, as a child, what would I have looked like had my father been someone else other than George Fisher? Ha ha. I have another story to tell here Not a very happy one, but I think that I shall insert it anyway at this time and on this tape. It refers to my brother Walter, who died before Lee, his daughter, was born. This incident happened in October of 1928. I was already a senior at Willimantic State Normal, living at Residence Hall. Living there because as a senior, the students had to live either at the dorm or in a home designated by the school. In October of that year, 1928, I received a letter from him, Walter, my brother, telling me that he was getting married and asking me to be a bridesmaid. This part was happiness, but part of it was not, because my mother was in the hospital, almost ready to come home, and he was very worried. Needless to say, I really was a bridesmaid at his wedding. I am sending this letter to Lee to reinforce her closeness to her father, even though he never knew her and she never knew him, because, as I've said before, he died before she was born. He was almost 22 years old. He died a few days before his 22nd birthday. A great shock to all of us, just about 6 weeks after his wedding. He must have had warnings of appendicitis months before, but disregarded the symptoms. When the appendix ruptured, he got peritonitis so severely that no drug of that time was able to squelch the infection. Nowadays, we have different antibiotics to fight such infections. I know we do, because I've had peritonitis at age 50, and I was cured. That was in 1960. And had we had the antibiotics in 1928, the ones we have now, I'm sure that he would have been cured. The reason why I think he had warnings prior to writing the letter to me was because of his complaint of not feeling well and blaming it on the restaurant food. You see, he lived in Tarrytown where he worked and was planning to come home to get married, then return to Tarrytown. Now I will quote his letter to me as he wrote it in 1928. It's dated October 21st, 1928. Dear Jenny, sorry, Jenny, that I couldn't call you up tonight. I am so sick that I didn't go out at all. How is Mama getting along? I hope she won't be sick anymore. Listen, Jenny, when Ma comes out of the hospital, she won't be able to do any work, so I tell you what to do. And don't forget to do it either. Well, anyway, maybe I'll probably be up by then anyway. But if I am not, you write to Anna, that's his fiancée, and ask her to come up and help Ma. She would be only too glad to, Jenny. Besides, she is not working now. Do that, Jenny. Don't forget, please. What I wanted to tell you over the phone is this. I am going to get married the 5th of November, only 2 more weeks. I got the license last time I was in Mystic, and the wedding was called off in church for the first time this Sunday. You know, it has to be announced 3 Sundays in a row before we can get married. Anna and I would like to have you stand up for us. Can you, Jenny? I wish you would. You with some other fellow and Bruno with some other girl. And another thing, Jenny. After the wedding, we would like to have dinner at our house. Do you suppose Mama would object, Jenny? It's not going to be a big wedding. Jenny, just as small as possible. I got $65 paid this week and put $50 away. Not so bad, is it? I expect pretty close to $75 next week. At least 70, anyway. Boy, I have been pretty tight since I've been working in Tarrytown. And I saved up a few $100s, Jenny. Only the darn restaurant food has got me. It has got the best of me. Well, it won't be long now, Jenny. I'll have a good place to eat and good food. And Anna sure can cook. I think she can beat you, Jenny. Well, someday when you visit us, you'll know for yourself. Gee, it's lucky I hit this job when I did. I can make good money from now on. I wonder how Mama feels about my marrying. Jenny, tell her all about it. Jenny, and then answer my letter and what she says. I know what I am doing, so she doesn't have to worry about that, Jenny. She will be able to come and spend a week or so with us every now and then and rest up. Don't you think so, Jenny? We got about 800 more trucks to make, and then we are going to have 10 days off. That means about 14,400 more rivets for me to drive about in 5 days. And then I'm coming home. Tell Bill to come after me down to Anna's home Sunday. Don't forget. I'll close now. Lovingly, Walter. Answer quickly. Don't forget to, please. Okay? Now that I've finished dictating that letter, I'm going to mail it on to Lee. I know she wants it, and as far as I'm concerned, it really belongs to her. She will enjoy it. After Walter passed away, Anne, Lee's mother, stayed with us for a while. Then, although pregnant, went to work in Norwich for friends of ours. She stayed with them until Lee was born. Since it was the summer of 1929, and I was home from school and graduated, I went to Norwich to be with Anne until she was able to travel back to our home in Salem. Of course, little Lee came along too. We couldn't leave her behind. She continued staying with us. When Lee was a few months old, her mother went back to Brooklyn with us, forgetting that she had a baby. I started teaching in my first school in Gilead. That was in Hebron. That September of 1929. And when Christmas came and we had a Christmas party at my school, my mother, father, Sue, and the baby came to the party. Lee was adorable, only about 5 months old or so, a little doll. Everyone just oohed and awed over that baby. My mother was still able to care for her. Baby Lee was a joy to all of us, even if her mother didn't seem interested. As I've said before, Mom cared for Lee until she was too ill to do so. Then my sister Stella, a junior then in high school, took over in the middle of the year. Mother's health deteriorated quickly from her cancer, and she passed away May 19, 1930. Anne, Lee's mother, never wrote or inquired about her baby, but did come to the funeral and again returned to New York. Lee was then about 10 or 11 months old. In the fall of 1930, we had to board Lee out with family friends in Norwich. Starting in September, because Stella had to go back to school, I to teaching, and Sue, then 11 years old, back to school. No one was home to care for Lee. In 1931, Lee came back to us from her boarding place, now being 2 years old, and we could care for her daily. We took her to a neighbor who cared for her until I came home from school. I took her there mornings, and Sue would pick her up after school and bring her home. This continued for about a year. When I met my husband, he also loved the child, and we decided to take her with us when we were married. My father hired a housekeeper who became our witch. We all moved out. Bruno married Bina, so we, the kids, rented a house on Route 85 at Ferry Lake Farms. Stella, Lee, and I went directly there, with Sue coming weekends and holidays. She stayed with my father, where the bus picked her up mornings, taking her to NFA, to school. It was lonely and difficult for her there, as the witch was a mean one. She ruled my dad so completely that he showed no love for his children, though I must say he was not ever mean to me directly, but allowed the witch to play her witch role. Sue had to stay at the old homestead because there was no bus to take her to and from school from the house we rented on Route 85. I felt so sorry for her when she told me stories of what the witch did or said, but I could do nothing about it. We just had to wait it out and be patient. Bina, my sister-in-law, now cared for Lee while I was at school. Sometimes I even took her with me. I could do that, you know, because the school children ranged from first grade through 8th grade. And being that it was a rural school and the parents very thoughtful, no one objected. Sometimes the children brought their little sisters or brothers to school for an hour or so. It was not unusual. This regimentation continued until Lee was about 4 years old, at which time her mother came for her without any warning to me to take her home with her to Brooklyn. She just showed up at the door. Now Lee did not know her mother, and when introduced to her, called her Mommy Ann, but clung to me. Of course, I couldn't part with her then. She was more mine than Ann's. Ann had remarried to a man named Danny Smith. It was he who insisted on her getting Lee because people gossiped about her, and he wanted to prove to them that Lee was a legitimate child, which of course she was. I refused to give her up immediately and sent Ann back to Brooklyn without her daughter. But after a few months, I relinquished her and let her go. Stella and I brought her to Brooklyn, leaving a crying child with her mother and stepfather. My heart yearned for her, and according to Ann, Lee yearned for me, making it very difficult for all. After all, her mother was a stranger to her, and also her new stepfather. The word mother meant nothing to her because she did not know the word. I had to explain to her over and over again that she belonged to her mother and why. To this day, I feel troubled over that decision which I know and knew had to be made. Quite often, Ann blamed me for this dilemma, saying I stole the child's love, but really, who was to blame? Not me. She was my baby for those few years, I know. A bond had been created which could not be easily broken. I'm sure Lee understands now. The right decision was made and kept, of that I am sure. Now Lee has her own beautiful family, children and grandchildren, and is so happy with her wonderful husband at her side and her family nearby. Good luck, Lee. I love you. I feel that I must add here an incident before I finish the tape about Lee. I should mention here that Lee was such a part of my life, and I took her everywhere I went, that I didn't realize that strangers thought she was my real daughter. I knew otherwise and didn't think anything about it until one day. I was in Woolworth's 5 and 10 in Norwich one day with Lee in my arms, as I always carried her, buying socks for my brothers. I wasn't positive about the size, so the sales lady said to me, "What size shoes does your husband wear?" I was surprised and said, "I'm not married." Then it was her turn to be surprised, as she had seen me with the baby many, many times. Her expression was weird. I don't know what she thought. Until that time, I hadn't realized why sometimes some people, especially at the square dances, looked at me kind of funny. They must have thought some strange thoughts. Of course, I was amused. I laughed over it and let it go by. I knew better, so I let the strangers think what they would. I still have room on this tape, so I will add just a wee bit more. After I was married to Anthony, I had 2 children. John first, then 6 years later, Stephen. John's godmother was my sister Sue, and Lee was godmother for Stephen. I would have it no other way. I had to have her in my family always. Did I do right? Of course I did. I know I did. Now Stephen has 5 children of his own, just like Lee and Dick did. She and Dick had 5 children. A nice, lovely family. Don't you agree?